Okay, welcome back to part 3 of lecture 2. By now you should have completed snapshot 4 and snapshot 5. Here's the sheet for snapshot 4. The clock time should be 3.79. If you went in the same kind of order that we did, then the next thing you should have thought about was that we had still had 0 completed because this 3.79 corresponded to the arrival of part number 3. Which means that this should all be the same except for the time. Remember, that should have been reduced by the 0.71. The Q should have had another, the part 3 or entity 3 added to it with its arrival time of 3.79 and its service time of 3.39 from up here. You should have advanced a bit more on this scale, right? This should be now advanced so that we're still busy at our server, or at our drill press is still working on blank 1. And the number in system should have been increased to 3 at this time point. It's okay if it wasn't to scale, of course. This is just to help us to visualize it, and we don't need it completely to scale. Although you should have been less than 5. I mean, I guess it doesn't need to be incredibly precise. Okay, so that is the snapshot 4. You should look at this. I'll give you 5 more seconds to look at this and make sure that you had it all correct. Okay, here's snapshot 5. Again, the next thing that occurred, if you looked at this bit, the next thing that occurs here is an arrival. It's this 0.62. Okay, so we advance the clock by 0.62 here to 4.41. We update, I guess I didn't say over here that the update should have occurred for that 0.62. My apologies. The update, again, going in order, there's still 0 completed because blank number 1 is still in service, but now the time is reduced by 0.62 to 0.22. There's a 4th entity now in the queue. It arrived at this time point. It has this service time from up here. Again, the system is still busy at this time of 4.41. That should be a bit before the 5. And now we have 4 parts in system. We have the 3 in the queue, and we have the 1 blank still in service. We update our next arrival time to 14.21, and we decrement our next departure time to 0.22 because that's the remaining service for blank number 1. Okay, so this is how your snapshot 5 should look. If my markings, of course, are making it difficult for you to read this, just rewind the video a little bit and then come back to this time point. Okay, so let's think about our next, what's going to happen next. We've been doing basically arrivals. We had arrival of blank 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now finally we're going to see a departure. Because that's, of course, the minimum of in our events calendar. That's the next thing that happens. So we have to update all the things. Okay, now we think about updating everything else. The clock time, all these things that are circled. First, the clock time. Well, it's the same idea, except now instead of adding the next arrival time, of course, because we're having a departure next, we're going to add 0.22 to that clock time. And so we get to 4.63. Okay, now completed. We finally have completed a part. We've completed blank number 1. So that will increase that to 1. We have our entity in service. Well, now blank number 1 is no longer in service. We finally get to put blank number 2 into service. And its service time has to be updated to this 1.76. Happy days. Okay. So now we're finally working on blank number 2. Entity number 2 is no longer in queue. It's no longer waiting to be served, so we have to remove that from the queue, and we push up all these other entities. So now we have entities 3 and 4 in queue. Blank number 2 is in service. We're still busy, so we still just move this, we move this line over a bit more horizontally to get it to 4.63. It's a bit hard to write with a hand. Again, you don't need to be to scale. Of course, you should respect the fact that we're still less than 5 here. Okay, now we think about q of t, the number in system. Well, that decreases now to 3, right? Because we finished number 1, it leaves the system. So you can see this kind of goes down. Again, the time scale is quite small when you're increasing it by 0.22, given the scale of our time axis. Okay, now we think about the next arrival time. Well, we've waited a little bit for that next arrival, so we reduced that next arrival time by the 0.22, so it goes down to 14.02. And then we have to think, well, what happens next? What happens next is a departure, and a departure is going to come from that 1.76, right? That 1.76 is going to be the next departure time. Okay, and so that concluded snapshot 6. Turns out there's going to be 14 more snapshots, 14 more events. We do a snapshot for every event, okay? And there would be, I'm sorry, not 14 more, there would be 6 more events, and then to get us to time 20. And if you go through that, this would be the final snapshot for time 20. You can see this system could continue on and on and on infinitely long. So you always have to, and every simulation has that sort of feature. And so you could kind of, the assumption is that there's this infinitely long process going on there. And of course, we can't simulate infinitely long, so we usually choose some sort of time horizon that's reasonable for our computational resources. In this case, our computational resources are our hand, so that's even more limiting than a computer. But if you were to do this and push this exercise on it, the final snapshot would look like this. Clock time would be 20. These are the rest of the features. I'm going to stop here, and you should consider what you did with your snapshots, make sure they were correct, and then return for the fourth and final